As a creative aspect, TV is one of the best things that we do as a species. Along with music and film and books, they bring out the best creative of all of us. They entertain and they bring so much joy to many. They invoke emotion and enable us to feel things that we bury sometimes deep down. That's what this podcast is for. Welcome to A Million Little TV Shows. This is what I call the breakdown while I break down. Each week I will go through a different TV show, a different season of that TV show, and different episodes of that show. And I will break down not only emotions, but I will break down stories from my life, and let you know why these TV shows mean so much to me, and why I believe that they are some of the most important shows out there. This podcast is here to highlight a lot of smaller TV shows, or TV shows that don't really get a platform, because we know of a bunch of TV shows that get a multitude of different podcasts. Ted Lasso, Game of Thrones, The Office, they've all got several podcasts out there analysing all types of different things. But there's not many out there for the little guy, and that's what I'm trying to highlight. So each week I will go through a different show, different seasons, different episodes, and I will go across all different kinds of genres and different countries to bring you what I believe is some of the best TV out there. So I'm glad you're here with me. I'm glad you're here for this journey. And if you've watched the shows before and you wanted to come here and get an analysis on them and have someone go through them and pick out bits that you might have enjoyed, then I'm glad you are here. If, however, you have never watched the show and you just want to come and have someone talk in your ear about different TV shows, I'm glad you are here. But I hope that it inspires some people to go and seek out these TV shows. They deserve to be watched. They were made with love and care, and they are the same as this podcast, made with love and care. I am your host, Mike, and I will take you through every adventure, every horror, every piece of drama, and I hope that you enjoy the show. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now episode 7 of season 12, and I'm really excited to be getting back into this show. I think it's a great show, and, I've had high praise over it. Because where it's not breaking any real new ground, it's still well acted, it's really well done. I've seen worse versions of this type of show, and I think it's just an enjoyable watch. In the times that we currently live in, I think it's just nice to have something that is just fun. The subject matter around it isn't fun, but I think the acting and the script and even the sound design are excellent. And you can tell people like Marlon Ackerman are really enjoying doing this show, just from the performance that she's put on, and yeah, I just think it's a great show. But let's get back into The Hunting Wives. So, where we left off, we know that Abby, the young girl, had died, and I was a little bit shocked that they actually revealed this in the middle of the season. Usually this would be something that would be strung out to the end, and then they'd probably pick it up again in season 2. But that is going to mean that season 2 is going to be kind of fresh. Either it's going to replay old ground and do a similar sort of plot line, or it's going to be something totally different. But it's going to be interesting whatever it is. But the fact that they revealed that it was Abby in season 4 that got killed is really well done. Like, there's not a lot of shows that would have done that. And especially when she looked very similar to the actual lead actress in the show. A lot of shows would have kept you waiting, kept you on the hook, and built this up to the point where you knew there was going to be an explosion. And you weren't sure how you were going to get. But this has subverted that trope, and I really enjoy that fact. So, in the last episode we saw that Abby had died, and she's been shot by someone. The same gun that was used on her was also used in a robbery, and it turns out that it is actually Sophie's gun, the lead actor in this. So there is a lot of suspicion around her, but also there is a lot of suspicion around, say, her boyfriend Brad, and I mean Abby's boyfriend Brad, but also Brad's mum. We have the pastor, we have Margot, maybe she was caught sleeping with Brad, and therefore she's gone after Abby because she doesn't want it to get out. Or maybe it was even Callie, because she might have seen in the darkness that it was a blonde girl. She might have actually thought that it was Sophie, and she's took her out, only for it to be revealed that Sophie's alive and Abby's unfortunately dead. But it could be someone else. I mean, we know that there was a girl kidnapped in and around the town, and we know that the police have been looking for someone who had actually kidnapped her, and it could have been them. Maybe they were found out by Abby, but I'm sure we'll find out in the next 4 episodes. So, let's get into it. This is The Hunting Wives, Season 1, Episodes 5 to 8. Episode 5, Not Her First Rodeo. So we pick up in the cop station. Sophie has been hauled in and she is being questioned about where she was the night of Abby's death. She strongly denies everything and tells them that she was with Margot the whole night. Of course, we know that she's lying. We know that she ended up leaving the party at some point because she passed out outside. Eventually, a lawyer turns up and he gets her out of the building. She is pissed because it turns out that her husband hasn't even come to pick her up. Even the lawyer that he sent was basically useless. And she's just annoyed at the whole situation. Of course, he ends up questioning her as well and asks whether she'd been drinking and driving and what else he didn't know about what she's been doing. And of course, she has to tell him that she had been drinking, she has been driving, not at the same time, but she has been. She didn't want to go to the NRA party at first in the first episode, but now she's owning a gun. Like, it just doesn't seem to make sense to him. He thinks that she's done it just to fit in, but then she tells him, well, that's what you wanted. You wanted me to fit in with the people around here. You've moved us down here from Boston, and now I'm trying to do what my husband wanted. And now he's basically going against what he said. It's not fair on him to say that, but also it's not fair for him to accuse her of what has happened. And also keep bringing up the past. The whole car accident thing, it was quite clearly an accident. And he doesn't know everything about what happened between her and Margot. Sophie then tries to contact Margot, and she goes down to the house. She isn't let in. She's turned away by Jed, but Jed at this point is getting ready to launch his campaign. So they're getting dolled up, and they look like, $1 million at the time when they walk out, but that doesn't help Sophie's case right now. And so Sophie just tries to contact any of them or through Instagram, any of the hunting wives, but they've all blocked her. Literally, she has been out of the loop for, maybe just overnight, and they've all blocked her in that time. She manages to find out when Abby's funeral is because it's the day that she's been hauled in, so she goes home, gets ready, and ends up going to the funeral to be with everyone. When she gets to the funeral, she ends up getting kicked out by Callie and one of the other girls. And it's here for the first time we see someone actually take pity on her after everything that she's been through. And the person that does is Jamie. Now, Jamie's had an interesting story throughout this as well because he wants to go to the cops, he wants to confess everything, he wants to tell the world about what happened because he knows that Brad and his mom are going to come together and they're going to plan something out. But he doesn't think it's fair on Sophie to be going through this alone, so he wants to do what's right. But as soon as he tells Brad that, Brad and he get into an argument, into an actual physical fight. Brad goes back home and tells his mother about this, and then his mother comes down and speaks to Jamie. She tells him that there is a program that he could enter where he won't have to stick around here forever and he can be exactly like Brad. He can go off to university or college and he can do his own thing, he can be his own person. He can just leave this world behind. And that's what Jamie has always been worried about, that he's going to get left behind by Brad. Since Jamie can't afford it, all of a sudden there is a $50,000 grant that he could potentially pick up that involves the church, and he could go to a Christian university and it would all be paid for, this scholarship. So he ends up taking the bribe to keep stum about everything that's been going on. He's playing into the rich people's hands, as most people do when it comes to money. But this is why he's so repentant when it comes to Sophie. He goes and speaks to her and he tells her what happened after they went back to the house. He informs her of what has been going on with her and what happened that night. So after they made out and Jamie had been fingering her, they went back to the living room and Sophie just kept saying that Jamie was too young. And it kind of turned him off a little bit because it was ruining the mood. And he was actually a respectful young gentleman. He didn't take advantage of her. He just kind of pulled away and just said, look, it's not working for me. And he took Brad home that night, leaving just Sophie and Margot. Of course, Margot is Sophie's backup, so Margot gets pulled into the police station as well. She's asked about everything that's been going on, and she tells the cops what happened. She doesn't tell them about Brad, and she doesn't tell them about Jamie, but she says that her and Sophie were there alone. After the girls left, it was just them two. They carried on drinking, and she took a Xanax. However, at 10:30, she ended up getting a phone call about her brother, or a family emergency, she says, and she headed out. She doesn't know what happened to Sophie that night, but she was gone by 10:30, leaving a massive gap in Sophie's story now. But the deputy that actually interviewed Sophie is starting to see flaws in the story, not Sophie's story. He believes that she didn't actually do anything, and when he goes and speaks to his injured colleague, she thinks that, yeah, something doesn't sound right here. But at this point, they can't quite put their finger on it. So they go over and see Sophie. They tell her what's gone off, and she cannot believe what has transpired. Margot has said things that isn't true. However, turns out it was, because the sheriff has actually investigated this and found out that what Margot has told them is true. She did end up going out of town and leaving around about 10:30 to go to this hospital to go and see someone. So now Sophie's story ends at 10:30. Nobody knows what happened to her until the morning, and obviously she woke up on the deck. Graham tells her to leave. He can't believe what she's done. He can't believe that she keeps lying to him and kicks her out. He says he can't put up with this anymore and he can't have her around their son. So she goes to a hotel. She ends up ringing Margot and telling her basically what she thinks of her. That she's a rich, entitled bitch and that she's a piece of shit and that basically she's fit her up for this murder. She can't believe that someone who has entangled herself around Sophie has done this to her, but she should have seen it coming. And Margot ends up playing that audio for the sheriff as well. So he's now heard how unhinged Sophie is, and it's really not looking good for her at all. That night when Sophie checks into the motel, she ends up getting another phone call, and it's from a woman named Sienna. Now you may recall that I told you Margot had 2 stepsons, twins, and they are Jed's kids, obviously. But he was married to a woman named Sienna, and it is Sienna who ends up calling and tells Sophie that she needs to seek out a man named Kyle. And this is the first time that Sophie's ever heard of this name, but Kyle, of course, is Margot's brother, or indeed Mandy's brother, which is Margot's other name. Episode 6, Deep in the Heart of Texas. Now, at the end of the last episode, Sophie actually went over to go and find Kyle. Kyle is a character, and the way that he's introduced to Sophie is ridiculous. He thinks that he's being followed, he thinks that he's being spied on, and basically when she comes to the door, he drags her in the house while fully naked. Like, she's obviously wondering what the fuck's going to happen to her, but he seems very, very paranoid. She starts asking about Margot or Mandy, and he says that he will help her out. He will answer any questions that she's got as long as she helps him out first. And so he gets some clothes on, thank God, and ends up going over to this drug den. And the money that Margot gave him at the beginning of the season, he goes and steals back because he's had it stolen from him. Of course, once Sophie sees that it's money that he's getting, she's a bit skeptical of him. She wonders why he's just stolen a bunch of money, and he says, well, they stole it first, so I'm just stealing it back because it's my money. And the skepticism comes in when she's like, well, you don't seem like you'd have that kind of money on you. And so he tells her it was a bribe from Margot just to basically keep out of the way and not cause too much of a ruckus, especially around her while Jed's running for governor. But it seems like back in the day, Margot and her brother were basically as thick as thieves. Because we see at the beginning of the episode that Margot gets into it with this guy and she ends up getting a lift from him. Now, he's an older gentleman and at this point she is 15. He wants to take her home to her actual house and she lets him, knowing that he's probably going to pull a move at some point, and she's ready for him, and so is her brother. And they end up stealing his truck, selling it, and they earn money to actually pay the rent on the place that they've got. Because their mother is, well, she's incapacitated. So they've obviously lived a hard life prior to this. And now Mandy, or Margot, will actually look after her brother as much as possible. Sophie asks Kyle if he actually saw Margot the other night, and he denies it. He says he doesn't know what happened, but the reason for that is because he overdosed. And so it turns out that Margot actually came to see her brother that night. Sophie goes over to see the doctor that treated Kyle and says she doesn't want any medical information, she just wants to know whether Margot turned up. The doctor confirms it and says that she sat by his bedside all night, and of course now Sophie doesn't know what to do. She's been thrown under the bus by Margot, and her story really does check out. Margot, however, has been at an interview all day, just talking about her husband and her family life, and that she's basically going to be the First Lady of Texas very, very soon. However, when she gets back to the car, there is a package in the passenger seat. She opens it and it is pictures of her with Brad. She knows that she is fucked if these get anywhere, and she can't talk to anyone other than Sophie. She finds out where Sophie is and she goes to see her. Obviously, Sophie is pissed because, well, Margot threw her under the bus. But Margot is so wily, she manages to convince Sophie that they can get through this together and they really need to get some help and look into this. Who has been stalking Margot, but also who has committed this murder. And so now they're going to try and help each other to find out what the hell's been going on. Sophie goes and speaks to Star, and Star basically tells her to go and speak to Pastor Pete. Abby would have confided in him a lot during her time with him. She was always around him, and he seemed to help her out quite a bit. And Margot ends up going and seeing the girls. She essentially says that she knows that she's got evidence on all of them about lots of different things, and so if they've got any evidence on her about something, then maybe they should speak up, because now she's starting to suspect everyone around her. And just to ensure that nobody talks, she gets them to sign an NDA, so that anything that comes out, she knows it's not going to be from them, and she's confident in them that they have all her secrets, so she's fine. Now, this Pastor Pete is a real creep. As I said before, he was masturbating over pictures of Abby after she died. And so when Sophie goes to see him, he is getting drunk, he's listening to really heavy metal, and he is waiting on someone. There's someone who's a girl called Nina, who is part of the pastor's group, who was good friends with Abby. He's waiting for her to come over, and when Sophie turns up, he has to make excuses and kind of placate what Sophie wants. He also tells her that Sophie had been pregnant. Editing mic here, just as I'm quickly going through it, I realised I said Sophie and not Abby, and she'd had an abortion at some point. And in this God-fearing town in Texas, that is not a good look for any girl. So Sophie now knows that she may have the reasoning behind why Abby died. If it wasn't Brad who did this, then Jill is definitely someone who is going to be in the frame for this, because she essentially runs the anti-abortion wing of the church. So it's not going to be a good look for her if her son's girlfriend has had an abortion, and it would explain the tensions between the two of them if Jill knew this. Pastor Pete, however, is waiting on Nina, as I've said, and he manages to have a day out with her. He takes her to a fair, he buys her some toys, he hangs out with her, gets her drunk, but eventually she drinks something that she shouldn't, because he's spiked her drink, and eventually she starts to pass out. He puts her in his car and drives away with her in the passenger seat. So we knew he was a bad guy, we just didn't know how bad he was going to get, and now it looks like he is going to abuse this other young woman, which obviously makes you think that he is potentially the one that killed Abby as well, and took the other girl, the original girl that went missing. And now Sophie and Margot have another target in their sights. They think that Jill is possibly the one that's done this to Abby because of her religious beliefs, although I'm not sure thou shalt not kill wouldn't come into that either. But things are heating up, and obviously Sophie is the one in the mainframe for this because of the gun, but there are other villains coming out of the woodwork now. Episode 7, Shooting Star. And all I'm gonna say is that it's like an episode of goddamn Game of Thrones in here. Because, well, shoot, there's bodies dropping everywhere. And if anyone's offended by the accent, I don't care. I have watched a lot of this show now, and that is all that's been feeding through to me. Just that Texas accent, and I like it. So anyway, the episode starts with Jill, and the day that she gave birth to Brad. And, I mean, it's quite a weird scene in all fairness. We see why there is such a connection between the two of them. She obviously gives birth to him. She thanks the Lord for her miracle. And then when she is asked whether she's going to breastfeed or bottle feed, she says that she wants to bottle feed, which doesn't seem like her at all. Until the nurse actually tells her, look, it's better for the baby if you breastfeed because you'll get more nutrients and, we'll get immunity. And as soon as she does this, it seems like she's natural, whereas a lot of mothers aren't able to get the child to latch on, and it's a frustration. Jill seems to just get away with it straight away. But as soon as she does, because she's never had anyone touch her nipples or play with them or whatever, she feels a brand new sensation. And it's something that she enjoys and maybe gets a little turned on by. It's a bit of a weird situation. And that kind of makes this bond for her between her and Brad. So now she knows that she will do anything to protect her baby boy. Not that she wouldn't anyway, but now she's felt this sensation come over her. And it's even noted by Margot and the other ladies in the episode that she always did have a strange thing when it came to her and Brad. She always had pictures of him with his shirt off and all sorts of stuff like that all over her Instagram. And it seemed a little bit weird that she is the way she is with him. There's being a proud mother, and then there's being whatever this is. Now that Margot and Sophie are on this case, and they are looking into all possibilities, including Jill, they obviously have more evidence now as to why potentially Brad could be the killer, or indeed Jill could be. They still have to clear Sophie's name, but without any real evidence as to why either of these two would have done that, Sophie is still the main suspect. Sophie once again goes over to see Star. Once she gets there, she tells Star of her theory about what's been going on with Abby. The fact that she may have been pregnant, and the fact that it may be Jill or Brad that could have done this. They could have stole her gun and gone after her. But Star is having none of it. She says that her daughter was virginal and she would have never done anything like that, and she certainly wouldn't have had an abortion. How dare you say such a thing in such a Christian town? After this meeting, Margot comes to see Sophie and tells her exactly the same thing. Like, you don't mention the A word in a town like this. People don't like it, and they certainly don't like having their children accused of it, but it does need to be said that it's something that has potentially happened. Margot and Sophie start to get a little bit hot and heavy as well, and they end up nearly sleeping together, but before it can go any further, Sophie tells Margot that she has to stop. She has to do everything that she can to get back to her son right now. She can't focus on having this affair with Margot. Not at this time. But she tells her as soon as everything is sorted and she has her life back on track, she will come back for her. And Margot tells her basically, you know where I am. But for now it seems that Sophie is going to do this alone. However, things are going to turn out badly for her when the police come knocking at her door. She thought she was going to come down to the station and give a statement about what she thought happened with Abby, and that Brad and Jill might be in the frame for this. However, the police don't want her for that. They bring her down to the station because they've managed to find some more evidence on what's going on. Sophie tells them that she'd never met Abby at all while in town. She had no relation to her, and she didn't even know the girl. So why would she kill her? However, due to the fact that this town is a hunting town, a lot of hunters end up putting out traps or cameras. So if they pick anything up, like a proximity camera, it will take video of the animal, whatever it is in the area. And if it's not an animal that trips it, it could be a person. And then they show Sophie a video of her and Abby getting into an argument through the woods, roughly where Abby died. So now Abby is in real trouble because she has no recollection of this argument because she was high, and now she's really in the frame for this. They arrest her on the spot, and she has no defence as to what's happened. As for the pastor, we thought it was him who'd gone after Abby and maybe killed her. Throughout the series, the deputy that had been injured had actually kept talking about how on the night that she got shot, she actually smelt vodka and cinnamon, like cinnamon gum. So when she goes over to see the pastor, who is now leaving town, he is very evasive about her questions, and when she asks if he's been drinking, he leans over to get his license and registration. However, she then sees cinnamon gum and realises that this is the man that shot her. She asks him to step out of the vehicle, but she is unarmed, and so he just ends up driving away. She gets in pursuit with him. She gets on the radio to her partner, and they meet up. They go after him, and they trap him. But before they can get any answers out of him, he shoots himself. So they are no further to knowing whether he was involved in Abby's murder. But when they end up hearing banging coming out of the U-Haul that he was pulling, they head inside and they find not only Nina, but Casey, the girl who has been missing for months now. And so it would seem that he is trying to take these two women and keep them for himself and move them across the country. And so because the deputy is convinced that it was definitely him that did this, he was after Abby all along, she gets disappointed when she finds out that actually he was in a drunk tank the night that Abby died. So it couldn't have been him. He was found in his car masturbating. So probably the night that we saw him masturbating over pictures of Abby was the night that he got arrested and Abby died. So the ball is now back in Sophie's court. Again, she was the last one to have any real contact with Abby. The only other person who had contact with her that night was Jill. She'd called her on the night, and we don't know what that conversation consisted of, but she did have contact with Abby. Star needs to get more answers about what has been going on with Abby. She finds out that Abby probably did end up having sex because she finds lingerie in Abby's bedroom. She goes over to see Jamie, and she asks Jamie if Brad and Abby were sleeping together. He tells her they were, and that potentially she was pregnant and had an abortion. And then we see Star going over to see Jill. She takes out a shotgun, she goes over to the house and she gets in. That night, while Sophie sits in prison, the rest of the girls, the rest of the hunting party, the hunting wives, end up going to the bar that they did the night that Sophie came out with them. But Margot isn't enthused about any of this. She starts to bring up the fact that Jill has been weird since Abby's death. And so her and Callie go over to see Jill. Once they get there, it takes Jill an age to get to the door, and eventually they push their way in, only to find Star dead in the kitchen. Jill ends up pulling a gun on her friends, and while she's pointing at Margot, she doesn't actually clock the fact that Callie has her gun out. Callie's always got a gun on her, and she's a crack shot. She ends up shooting her 3 times, which is unnecessary, or 9 times is unnecessary as well, but she shoots this woman 3 times in the chest, and Jill dies instantly. So we've got Jill dead, we've got Star dead, and now the pastor is dead as well. And we are no closer to actually finding out what happened. Episode 8, Sophie's Choice. So with the investigation all around Jill, basically Sophie gets let off. She gets let out of prison, and they have basically just pinned it all on Jill. And it seems like that is a good conclusion to the whole saga. Sophie then goes home and basically tells her husband that they're done. She can't do this anymore. She wants to try being on her own, and immediately ends up going over to see Margot. They sleep together and everything seems happy in their world again. They're back together and they're just enjoying each other. However, then Sophie goes into the bathroom and she finds in one of the drawers a bunch of tampons. Now, earlier on in episode 1, when they first met, Margot said that she wasn't able to wear tampons. But when this is brought up again, Margot denies it and says, no, I can. I don't know what you're talking about. So Sophie becomes suspicious of all of this. She researches online why someone wouldn't be able to wear a tampon, and one of the reasons is if they'd recently had an abortion. And so Sophie realizes that maybe it wasn't actually Abby who was pregnant. She heads over, she sees Brad, and Brad confirms that he did say that his girlfriend was pregnant and that they were sorting it out, but he never actually said it was Abby when it came to the pastor. So Sophie begins to realize that both Jill and Star could be dead for no reason. Star only went over there because of the whole thing with Abby being pregnant. Turns out it wasn't her. And so Sophie ends up calling the one-eyed man. Because earlier on at Abby's funeral, he'd actually left a note on her windshield saying basically, you need to call me now. She calls him, but it turns out that it's not him who's going to be doing the meeting. She meets a new guy and he basically takes her through what he's got. And that is that there is a doctor in a small town that knows them very well. In fact, he is their secret father. Sophie starts putting 2 and 2 together, and it's the doctor that she met earlier on in the series when she went to ask about Kyle, and she goes to see him. She tells him that she knows everything that's been going on, and she knows all about who he is, his secret child, or secret children, in both Margot and Kyle, and says that if he calls the cops, she'll let the world know about this, including his wife, who is literally outside the door. And so it would seem that he was covering for her when Abby got killed, and so was Kyle. Sophie also asks whether Margot came to him, her father, with the fact that she got pregnant and she needed the abortion. She can't believe that a father would do that to his own daughter, but apparently that is what happened. So then she goes and confronts Margot. Margot begs and pleads and tells her that they can be together. They can just get away from here and be together, and it doesn't have to be this way. They can start over. The case has been closed, people are dead, and they've got away with it. They can just go. But Sophie is seeing her in a different light now. She isn't the Margot that she thought she knew. And Sophie leaves her. That night she heads back home and she goes and speaks to Graham and tells him that she made a mistake and that she is back. She also tells him that she's had a difficult few months, weeks, whatever it is, while she's been there, and that she's also had an affair with Margot. He just gets some space to try and process this, but in the morning he's gone. He's gone back to Boston and he says he'll be back in a few days. Margot at this particular point is scrambling. Jed comes to talk to her about what's been going on and she tells him exactly. She says that she slept with Brad. She says she got pregnant by him and that she's sorry for everything that's happened. It won't happen again, but people now know. And Jed really doesn't take any shit. At the beginning of the episode, we actually see how those two met. They met during a menage a trois with Jed's ex-wife. Sienna had arranged the whole thing, a threesome with Margot and Jed, and it ended up costing her marriage. And so Jed basically kicks Margot out. She goes to see her brother and tells him what's happened and that she has been kicked out. But he tells her she needs to get her head back in the game and not worry about all of this. So she ends up going over to see Callie. Of course, Callie will always be happy to see her. She's definitely got a soft spot for her still. And they end up sleeping together. But afterwards, Callie basically says, I'm no fool. I know something's going on, so what happened? She tells the story that essentially Sophie is making things up about her. That she had this abortion and that she's been sleeping around with Brad, and asks Callie if the sheriff finds out anything about this, she'll let her know. And of course, Callie believes her and tells her, look, I've got your back. Kyle, however, without actually listening to the advice of his sister, ends up going after Sophie. He stops her in the middle of the street and eventually she ends up running him down because he's threatening her, he's being aggressive, and all she wants to do is get away from him, but she ends up running him down. He ends up dead in the middle of the street and Sophie realises that she needs to do something. She needs to get rid of the body. She leaves his truck, she takes the body and she dumps it off the edge of a cliff into the water. But just before she does, Margot gets back to the trailer. She calls her brother because he's not there and Sophie accidentally answers. Margot hears breathing on the other end of the phone and then it stops. The call is disconnected and Sophie then pushes Margot's brother Kyle over the edge. And so as Kyle sinks into the blackness, Margot knows that she has lost her brother but doesn't know how just yet. Sophie has been told that if she gets into any more trouble, the law will come down on her like a ton of bricks. She is now in more trouble than it's worth. And at some point they may find Kyle at the bottom of this lake because we've already seen that they have started investigating why Kyle's truck is in the middle of this street, all alone with nothing around it. But we'll have to pick that up next season. So this show throughout has been filled with mystery and it's been really good. Like, you could have picked out a bunch of characters in this that could have done this, killed this girl Abby, and the other subplot of the pastor actually created a good diversion. You knew that there was something wrong going on in this town, but you didn't know what, and you didn't know how far it went. So I really can't wait for season 2 because obviously Sophie and Margot are going to be at loggerheads because of what's happened with the brother, Kyle. But Sophie has a lot of dirt on Margot now. She knows that it was Margot who killed Abby, due to the fact that, Margot eventually actually told her what had happened. It was that Abby had found out that she'd had an abortion and was ready to go and talk to the police about it. But she couldn't have that because of the way that she lives her life. She couldn't have Jed finding out about this at all. And so she needed to close this down. And she did that by killing Abby. The reason that it was Sophie's gun that was there is because Sophie's gun was the closest. And it was all just coincidental that Abby was caught on film with Sophie. So next season is going to be very interesting. There's a few new cast members coming in that I've seen, and yeah, it's going to really kick off. And I hope there is going to be some secondary plot as well, something a bit like the pastor in this, because it really made a good plot through where you knew the connection with the pastor, but you didn't know how he was connected. And the fact that he was caught doing things around Abby, or with things that Abby had, it was really interesting and really made a good subplot that was attached to the main plot. And I really hope that Marlene Ackerman comes back next season with the fire and ferocity that she's had throughout this season, because she's been excellent. Brittany Snow has been really good in this, but Marlene Ackerman, she has this way about her. She looks like a fucking tiger at times, and then there's others when she looks like a snake. She looks like she wants to devour the people in front of her, and it's all around the eyes. It's the expressions within the eyes and the smile that she's got. I said it in the last episode that the guy who played Mark Anthony should have actually played the devil at some point, and I think that Marlene Ackerman could have played the devil as well. She's a temptress, she's a seductress, and yeah, she's really good in this role. This kind of southern belle that is a temptation basically to everyone in the town. Everyone wants to have a go with her, everyone wants to be with her. And the few that she selects, it just makes them feel electric. So, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see the next season, and I cannot wait for that. I believe it's coming out sometime this year, so I don't know if I'll do a Ginny and Georgia on it, but I will try and get it out as soon as possible. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. It's been a lot of fun, and I cannot wait to crack on with the Bates Motel next, because, well, yeah, that's a really good show, and I'm really enjoying it as well. But I'm done for today, so thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing. Please do all of that because it really helps me out. But until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye. As always, thank you for listening to this podcast, and you could really help me and the podcast by giving a like, share, subscribe on all major platforms that you listen to podcasts on. As an independent podcaster, this will just help me exponentially when it comes to actually doing more things with this podcast. I truly do enjoy this, and I absolutely love revisiting these TV shows with you guys. So any engagement from you is always welcome, and I will try and listen to all of you when you give suggestions or just tell me what you think about the podcast. But once again, thank you for listening, and until next time, I will speak to you soon. Bye.